What are you reading over there, Fred? I'm just reading this here magazine. Looks like this week a doctor said it's okay for people to be 300 pounds. It's published in a magazine? Say it ain't so. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam. Sorry I couldn't help myself this week. I had to be just a little bit dramatic because we're getting closer and closer to Halloween. So I figured why not just add a few more characters to the channel. This past week, there has been an article circulating the internet titled, "I'm an obesity expert, and here's why it's okay to be 300 pounds. And based on that title alone, your first impression is that a medical doctor has come out and said that it is a-okay for someone to weigh 300 pounds. How can it be? How could a medical doctor, a physician scientist to be exact, come out and agree with fat acceptance? We should be up in arms. There should be a mob ready to meet her at the door.
Torches! Get your torches! Pitchforks! Can't be an angry mob without pitchforks!
There's no way it's healthy to be 300 pounds. What does she mean? The worst part is this alignment wouldn't even be outside of the ordinary, as we've already seen another medical doctor align themselves with the movement, as well as various online scientists and dietitians. If we were going to judge Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford by her cover and this article's bad title, it would appear that she would be a perfect fit for the fat acceptance movement. But you know me, I am not about facades, and of course I had to go and dig a little deeper just to find out what was going on. And since I wanted to know what she stood for, you guessed it, I did a little research and I found out that she actually falls somewhere in between fat acceptance and the calories in, calories out talking points. I watched hours worth of interviews here on YouTube. I skimmed some of her research articles and her books that she has published so that we could sit down and talk today about what this article is and what Dr. Stanford actually does. Let's dive right in. First, let's talk about who Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford is. Dr. Stanford is an obesity and medicine physician scientist, educator, and policymaker at Massachusetts General Hospital. And physician scientists are so interesting to me because they are exactly what their title says. A physician and a scientist. And they bridge those worlds and bring them together to conduct research. They complete intensive scientific training in addition to their medical training, meaning they have an in-depth knowledge of human disease as well as scientific training in research and analysis. It really is the best of both worlds. I have had the pleasure of working closely with physician scientists previously in some of my roles, and I didn't know until I started working with them that they actually have whole catalogs of human biological samples so that they can research new therapies and also work to repurpose drugs that were created for maybe one disease, and they figured out if they tweak it just a little, it could potentially cure or treat other diseases. It's actually a really cool field. And Dr. Stanford has a lot of titles and degrees. She's an MD, she has a master's in public health, a master's in business administration, and a master's in policy. She's also gotten too many scholarships to count. And I'll admit, after finding all of this out, I was even more worried that they had found the perfect person to add to their movement. Just chef's kiss of a human being, physician scientist, backing them up. And it made me wonder, how could this happen? How could a physician scientist support fat acceptance? Well, despite what the article title says, she really doesn't. So let's take a deeper look at the article in question, and then I'll share a little bit of what I found about Dr. Stanford. The article in question was published by Insider and is an as told to essay by reporter Marianne Gunat. Probably pronounced that wrong, sorry. They note at the top of this article that it has been edited for length and clarity, meaning they edited information and parts of the conversation out of the actual article. probably skimming for what they viewed as the most important points to publish. In the article, Dr. Stanford is talking about an encounter she had with a patient who came in to see her about his weight. And she had seen him on a commuter rail in Boston, one that she rode frequently. So she had seen him walking up and down the aisles, climbing the rails, etc., etc. And the article further implies, as Dr. Stanford started working with this man, she found out that he had a pretty active lifestyle, he'd been exercising in addition to his work, and that he ate well, but they leave it vague. When she met this man, he was about 550 pounds. The article further states that Dr. Stanford treated him with a variety of treatments, including pharmacotherapy and weight loss surgery. He lost 250 pounds and he is now maintaining 300 pounds, and she is okay with that. That is the entire purpose of this article, and that is the title of her saying she's okay with a patient being 300 pounds. The article further continues to talk about weight bias. Dr. Stanford does mention that she believes that weight bias is the second most common bias to race bias. And she makes good points that I wouldn't argue with, that if a patient feels like they're being discriminated against by their doctor for their weight, they're unlikely to go to a doctor. Therefore, their symptoms could get worse. And then by the time they do actually go to a doctor, it could be too late. And there's really not a good way for me to argue with that. It's true. There are a lot of people I know. There are people online who have told us, like Glitter and Lasers, that they do not want to go to a doctor because they don't want to be discriminated against. And therefore they wait and wait and wait, and then they might be too far down the road for the doctor to even do anything when they finally go in. Dr. Stanford also mentions that people who feel like they're being discriminated against tend to have elevated stress levels, and elevated stress actually helps your body hold on to adipose tissue more than normal. Now, I was seeing this article everywhere, all over the interwebs, and people were ready to hands up Duke a physician scientist out here about saying that it was okay to be 300 pounds. I mean, people were going as far as to speculate that she had worked with this patient and said he ate well, but didn't know what he was eating at all. Like she wasn't working with him personally and just took his word for it. And to be fair, that's the way the article kind of made it seem, because it was purposefully vague. And I don't think that we can count that against Dr. Stanford. And I'm sorry to have to do this, Marianne, but we're going to throw you right on the chopping block. We should be angry, but maybe more so with the writer than with Dr. Stanford herself. You see, when I started to research her, I discovered she wouldn't fit into either camp. She doesn't believe that solely doing calories in, calories out can fix the problem sometimes. She also goes as far as calling obesity a chronic disease, mentioning how people are going to have to fight that chronic disease for the rest of their lives.
Several organs that are involved, and that's why obesity is a disease.
I saw her in many interviews say that obesity is a disease that needs lifelong treatment. And I appreciated her takes, her knowledge, her research on the topic of obesity. And just like the people who were calling out the article, I was kind of curious to figure out how she works with patients to figure out their optimal strategy. And here, in one of the interviews I found, we can hear her talking about how she sort of kicks off her meetings with her patients to learn more about them, to help them find the right tool for the job.
So given the multifactorial nature of this disease, how do you go about determining the optimal strategy for a patient? I mean, does it come down to saying which causes are most in play for you, and then
right, exactly. That's it. What's most in place for you. And so that's why this job is interesting, complicated, all at the same time, is that every single patient, unless they're identical twins, are going to be different. You know, what they're going to tell me, their story, what led them to sitting there in front of me via telemedicine or in my office is going to be different. And so I have to listen to kind of some of these key factors. And then let's say I find out 5 things were issues. Maybe they stopped smoking, they gained weight. Maybe they're on medications that cause them to gain weight. Maybe they have a strong family history of obesity or whatever it is. I have to kind of take that in a stepwise fashion in terms of like, okay, are these things that I can actually address? What have they done in the past? What was quote unquote successful? And I put air quotes around that because I see success as something that's sustainable, not a short-term gain or loss in the situation.
So here we can see her talking about the basics, kind of the 30,000 foot level of what she does when she meets with her patients, which is asking them a lot of really probing questions, kind of trying to figure out what they've tried in the past, what's been sustainable, what hasn't been sustainable for them, and sort of trying to help them figure out, okay, this didn't work, maybe we try this next step now. She also had a really great analogy about how she views the tools to help people fight obesity.
I want to give them the best tool for the size of the problem. And so by that, I usually use, I'm live in Boston, so I think about snow a lot. So I will ask them, I say, okay, so let me ask you guys this. And I do this at the beginning of the visit, especially in patients that have severe obesity, and they will attest to that if they happen to hear this. I say, okay, so let's say we get a foot of snow in Boston, which could happen at any given point. It can even happen, in the middle of April. It's happened before, so many years that I've been here. I said, so I asked them, what's the appropriate tool for the city of Boston to use to move the snow out of the way? And they'll be like, of course, a plow. I'm like, okay, well, I think that's reasonable. So I said, well, why not use like a teaspoon? And they're like, Dr. Stanford, that's ridiculous. You're not going to get the snow out of the way with a teaspoon. I was like, okay, all right. Well, this teaspoon is kind of small. What if we get like a punch ladle? It's a little bit bigger, but what about using that? And they're like, well, I mean, slightly better, but like, it's really going to take some time. I'm like, okay. And then I leave it there, and then I go and do the visit. And then I come back at the end, and I ask them, so what do you think is the best tool that we should utilize? And let's say a patient that has severe obesity. And they'll say, oh, yeah, I think we should try another diet. And I'm like, okay, well, but you just told me earlier that if we have snow, it's a foot of snow, that I shouldn't use the teaspoon. But you're telling me to use a teaspoon for a plow-sized problem. And then sometimes it clicks. I would say it almost always clicks. Then there's a resistance because they answered it. And so I said, well, why do you want to use a teaspoon for a plow-sized problem? And so we know the best treatment for severe obesity is metabolic and bariatric surgery.
And I don't know about you, but I really liked this analogy. It makes a lot of sense that once you're so far into it, you can't really use a teaspoon to get yourself out. You need to go all the way to the end. And she actually talks a lot about severing the brain to stomach sort of connection when you do a bariatric surgery. Because by the time you need bariatric surgery, you're probably hitting the bottom, the point of no return. And that's what you need to sort of break that bad habit off, is to just cut the neuron where it exists, get rid of the stomach, and sort of reshock your system, if you will. And I just want to back up a second here, because she does talk a lot about bariatric surgery in her interviews. But when I started skimming her book, she actually lists in order of priority how she wants patients to try to begin fighting obesity. The first of which is diet and exercise. So changing your diet, increasing your exercise or movement to see if that helps you lower your set point in a healthy way. If that no longer works, then the next step is to maybe try medication to sort of help you. Because sometimes when you're losing weight by diet and exercise, you can hit a plateau. Sometimes you plateau for a really long time and you just lose sight. But instead of allowing your set point to go back up and gaining weight, you can help lower it a little bit more with medication, suppress the appetite, and get yourself still used to those sustainable changes over time. If all else fails between diet and exercise and medicine, then she promotes bariatric surgery or weight loss surgery. Either way, all of her research is intriguing to me. There was one other research element that actually popped straight out for me, which is she does a lot of comparison to bodies that are overtly thin. And she actually found that bone densities and likelihood for fractures is equal between patients who have suffered with being chronically underweight. They're the same as people who are obese. And she's done a lot of studies like that, looking at bone density, fracture rates, all of those sorts of things. So again, it's just very fascinating. And I know people who are not with fat acceptance were very up in arms about this article. I'm actually quite interested to find out how fat acceptance feels about it. I couldn't find any of them talking about it. If you did, please drop it in the comment section below. I would love to go and catch up on it. I couldn't find anything. And there's this teeny tiny part of me wondering if it's because she doesn't actually agree with them. So how can they put her on a pedestal for their movement? Because it's not a great look for their movement to have a thin, black, female doctor come out and say that obesity is actually a chronic disease with a little bit of personal responsibility behind it. Better to just look away and pretend it never happened. And they probably also had to ignore it because she promotes pharmacotherapy and weight loss surgery, which they have openly told us they view as bodily mutilation.
They want us to mutilate our bodies. They want us to take injections for the rest of our lives.
That clip makes me cringe every single time. So, I guess the old adage sticks. Can't judge a book by its cover. Or a badly written article title. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye!